evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 41 of the Retrospectives podcast. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Sterlings. James, are you ready for yet another stealth game in our ongoing series of trying to forget JRPGs?
Last year we had this running joke where you'd only pick first-person shooters, but the pendulum's clearly swung in favor of stealth games recently. I know you want to pick Thief 2 at some point in the future. We might have to make a little gap to keep the variety up, you know?
Yeah, we'll go back to FPS games, just alternating between those two forever.
I mean, in
Sounds
your
pretty
case,
good to me.
most of the stealth games are FPS games as well, so are you really changing it up there?
I am, because Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, the game that we're doing for this episode, is a third-person one, so it's completely different. So yes, we're doing Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, which often has the subtitle Stealth Action Redefined. It's just a nice little thing to distinguish it from the other games in the series. It was first released in 2002 by Ubisoft Montreal. They later on went to make series like Far Cry and Assassin's Creed. So this was their first title as a studio, and they knocked it out of the park, because Splinter Cell was a massive hit when it first released on Xbox back in 2002. It was later ported to PC, PS2, and GameCube. Each of those versions has slight differences, but I would say 90 to 95% of the game is the same. And there was even a demake of the game for the Game Boy Advance. This fortnight, we both played on the PC version. We are, of course, the Retrospectives podcast. Each and every fortnight, James and I play through a classic video game of the past to determine if it's truly stood the test of time. We're not really interested in how good these games were on the time of their release. So even though Splinter Cell was considered a masterpiece when it was released, we don't really care. All we want to know is whether it's still a good game. Is this still worth your time to play through today? So each and every fortnight, James and I play through these games. We do not talk to one another about the game at all, except in maybe the lightest terms, so that we can have an authentic discussion / argument on whether this is actually a good game or not.
Yeah, and we don't hold back usually. There's been some real stinkers on the show that a lot of people have some real nostalgia for, but none of that really matters to us, right? We're playing these games, or most of these games, for the first time. And generally we're not blinded by our love of these games, so, if it sucks, we're gonna say it sucks.
We do our best not to be anyway, because obviously nostalgia is a difficult drug to overcome. But we try and bring these games into the glaring sunlight to expose wrinkles and all. Before we start our discussion about Splinter Cell, just a couple of things about the game, some housekeeping things and bugs that we encountered. The first thing is that there is a major issue with this game that is fixed with a simple launch command in Steam, something I didn't realize until I'd actually encountered the bug unknowingly. So basically, there are spotlights in this game, and certain enemies have torches, and they are completely invisible unless you include this simple command line fix. So we'll include a link to that in the show notes and the website. But if you do play the game, ensure that you include this command line, because the section with the spotlight is stupid if you can't see the spotlight.
It's basically unbeatable unless you have the fix, because a lot of the shadows in the game actually don't work on a lot of modern graphics cards, so you gotta enforce this alternate shadow style in order to actually be able to see and progress through one of the later levels.
So apart from that, I actually had no major problems with this game. It crashed once, but other than that, it worked perfectly. So I was... Are
you joking?
Yeah, I was...
Oh, you got off easy then, hey. I did not have that pleasant experience that you did. I actually had a number of issues with the game getting it to work on PC. Like, when I first installed it, I noticed that all the cutscenes would flicker very violently to the point where, it gave me a headache watching them, and I had to, purposely not look at the screen. And in addition, there's no native widescreen support. I did find some fixes online, however, installing them caused a bunch of other bugs to begin happening, such as textures not loading, and then even later, more disturbingly, enemies not loading into the level. And this wasn't even fixed with a simple restart of the game. Like, if I saved my game while it was in that buggy state, it would save the bugs onto my file and I'd have to start the level again. So I did a fresh install, and then even after that, I was still having, those shadow problems you had, and it would the game would crash on my computer every third load or something like that. It wasn't the easiest title to get running for me. But it wasn't completely unmanageable. I'd say the game's still in a playable state, but it's definitely not perfect on modern, Windows 10
Yeah,
systems.
it's weird that it was that bad for you because, like I said, I just played it pretty vanilla and it all worked pretty well. So it might be a graphics card issue or something.
Your mileage might vary with this one, so be aware of that.
I have just remembered one bug I encountered, which was very frustrating. At one point, you need to use a laser mic to record a conversation that someone's having on
Yep.
the phone. And when the prompt came up to do it, I didn't think I was in the right position. So I kind of was trying to maneuver to a better position and, sneak past some enemies. And then I got the notification that I'd failed the mission because I hadn't recorded the conversation in time. I was like, oh, whatever. So I reloaded my quick save, which was, about 2 minutes earlier. And the moment I loaded into the game from my quick save, it said, you didn't record the conversation in time. So the scripting of that was completely bugged. That whole thing should have been rewound, but it was kind of hard save. So I had to start that mission
That's really
again.
weird.
Yeah, so that was an odd thing with the scripting that stuffed me up, that forced me to restart a mission. But I lost maybe 10, 15 minutes. So it was no big deal. And I mean, maybe I was stupid for trying to maneuver to a different spot in the first place. But yeah, other than that, for me at least, it worked fine. But be aware that it's not necessarily going to be a smooth ride.
Yeah, and if you really want to play this game, there's always the option of emulation. This game was available on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube as well, I believe. So you might have better luck there.
It's worth noting that the other significant difference between the versions is that the PC version has quick saving. And I know for a fact the Xbox version doesn't, and I can't imagine the console versions do. So I want to get into a detailed discussion on that a bit later when we get to the gameplay bit. But short version, I strongly recommend the PC version because it has quick saving and the other versions do not. So keep that in mind, and we will go into that more later.
Yep, and for the record, I agree with Patrick there. So, did we want to launch into a quick summary of the game's plot and then maybe get into that?
We shall. So, yeah, the first thing I want to jump into about Splinter Cell is a story. So, it's a Tom Clancy property. Tom Clancy wrote a lot of espionage, sort of international crime thriller sort of books in the 90s and 80s, I believe. And this is a Tom Clancy property, so it kind of follows that mold. You play as Sam Fisher, who's an ex-Navy SEAL, Black Ops guy. He's really good at murdering people. He's good at hacking. He's good at stealth and infiltration. He's a super soldier essentially, but one that uses stealth and tactics and strategy and moves slowly as opposed to blowing everything up and shooting unsilenced guns and making a lot of noise. He's a secret agent, basically, very James Bond-esque, or Solid Snake-esque, I guess you could say. He gets recruited out of retirement by a special organization that's part of the NSA called Fifth Echelon, which is basically a new organization that's been formed in the wake of the threat posed by terrorism, both cyber terrorism and it's more cyber terrorism focused as opposed to I guess what you'd call traditional terrorism, suicide bombings, and things like that. So Sam Fisher's been recruited by this special organization that, as far as the American government, doesn't exist. He begins investigating the disappearance of a couple of agents in Georgia, and a lot of the story surrounds the meteoric rise to power of a billionaire called Nicolades and the plots that he goes on and the complications and conspiracies that revolve around him. So I'm going to launch into full spoilers of the plot now. It's not that the plot is crazy complicated, but there's a lot of bits to it. So I just want to talk about the plot substantively because I've got some significant criticisms of it.
Yeah, and if you're the kind of person that hates spoilers, honestly, I don't think the spoilers in this game are anything crazy. Like, if you do know them, it's not going to ruin your experience of the game. It's not really that kind of story.
There aren't any crazy plot twists, really. It all kind of unfolds logically one step after the other.
Yeah.
So what happens in the story, and this is full spoilers, so final warning, is that Nikolaj rises to become the president of Georgia, and he's got a secret plan to invade the neighboring country of Azerbaijan. To what end is not really clearly explained. He just wants to invade Azerbaijan. And what's more, he does, because as you're trying to poke around and figure out what's happened, he kind of beats you to the punch and kind of sweeps his commandos through Azerbaijan. It looks like he murders hundreds and perhaps thousands of civilians and occupies the country. The United States takes it back, like they send an invasion force to beat the Azerbaijan, sorry, to beat the Georgians out of Azerbaijan, and then they go into Georgia and defeat them. And Nikolaj goes into hiding and he starts retaliating with terrorist activity, cyber warfare, information control. Like he stuffs up trains posts so they collide with one another. He makes factories explode, that kind of thing, on U.S. soil. So he's retaliating with cyber warfare, basically, and you're trying to track him down and catch him. Eventually, what happens is it's revealed that the Chinese have been helping them. There's a faction of the Chinese that have been helping him, and it's your job to find proof that they're helping them so that you can prevent World War III. The first idea I want to talk about in relation to this story, there's two major ones, but the first one is that I think the main problem with this story doesn't lie in the mission to mission beats and how one mission leads to another. It's that it's very underwritten.
Yes.
Because we don't know why Nikolaj wants to invade Azerbaijan or even what he would gain by doing so. I did a little bit of research, and Azerbaijan and Georgia have had basically peaceful relations for the past 100 years with no major issues. There's no major religious divide or political divide that I can see. So it's just kind of invented as a conflict with no basis at all. And there's no explanation given for it at all. There's no explanation given for why the Chinese would support this action either. Like, in what way does this weaken America? What does this achieve? And as I was playing through this game, it just basically doesn't make any sense because nothing is explained on a macro level, like a political level, why any action that any of these factions make actually makes sense. I don't know if you felt that way, James.
I think underwritten is the perfect word to describe the plot of this game. In terms of the hooks that lead you from mission to mission, I actually think that the story does a good job of logically flowing from one level to another, better than a lot of games, honestly. I never felt confused as to why each mission was happening and what we were doing. That all made perfect sense, and I had no problems with that. But in the macro sense of the factional conflict across the nations, in terms of the main villain's motivations, his total lack of charisma in the story, and the characters' interactions within the levels, just kind of lacking any sort of playful banter and that kind of thing. I never really felt invested in either the overall conflict or at the smaller level between the characters. Just nobody was fleshed out, and it really hurt the experience for me.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where I can see in a Tom Clancy novel where you've got hundreds of pages, there would be the time taken to establish a potential political conflict. But there's just none of that there. So basically, if you start thinking about this and you start asking questions, there's no answers there. It's just basically these guys are bad and they're doing bad thing. This faction of the Chinese government bad is doing bad thing. You ask why, and there's no answers because it doesn't. There are no answers. There's nothing that's been written there. It's not even a question of this was a badly written, motivation. There is no motivation.
There is no motivation. Yeah. There's no motivation. There's no personality. There's just nothing there. Like, in my head, when I think of the main villain of this game, like, all that comes to my mind is his face on screen. I don't know what he's like. I don't know why he's doing what he's doing. I don't know what his goal is. I have no idea why Nicolas is the way he is. He just is. And maybe that's not even important to, you, the main character, who's, just a soldier and it's just your job to follow orders. But there's nothing interesting here in the writing to really, like, hook you in, to make you care about any of the characters or the overarching plot. The only time... A lot of the missions later in the game, there's like the threat of a nuclear explosion, and I just felt nothing, right? They didn't play it up enough. Whereas a few levels prior, there are some American soldiers who've been kidnapped, and they're going to be, it's the villain's plan to execute them on live TV to send a message to the Americans. And I think they did an okay job of like playing up the suspense and the threat there.
Yeah.
But after that level, it just falls off a cliff. There's a nuclear bomb, for Christ's sakes. People should be terrified or panicking, and there's just like nothing. It's really weird.
Yeah, I think that the game kind of does signpost it, like you said, by Lambert says to you, we're not going to tell you the biggest story. We're just going to focus on the mission. But the problem is that the broader political conflict should have still been written, and you should have got bits and pieces of it as you went, instead of them not writing it at all. It's okay for them not to give you the whole story, fully explained in a manual like in Archimedean Dynasty. I wasn't demanding that the game fully justify a detailed political conflict, but we needed to know if the motivation was like religious jihad or whether it was purely coldly political, or they could have made up a centuries old conflict between the two countries, something. So yeah, that was something that really stood out to me as a problem.
Even something as like simple and shitty as him being an egomaniac or something like cheesy like that, I would have been happier with than this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. And anything is better than nothing, even if it is poorly explained.
Yeah.
So I've got another huge criticism of the story, and this one's a little bit harder to define, so stay with me.
Okay.
Splinter Cell was released in 2002. So it was released after 9/11, but this is before the Iraq War. Now, James and I are Australians, we're not Americans, but Australia was caught up with the Americans in both of these conflicts. So it's got some political relevance to us down in Australia. I would say that post 9/11, but pre Iraq War, that 1 to 2 year period, that there was a sense of goodwill and support for America and American institutions and the goodness of America, as opposed to the evilness of those who committed the acts against America on 9/11. Now, just to make it completely clear, those acts were completely evil against America. But I think that in the past 20 years, it's been demonstrated that America can't just send invading forces into the Middle East and solve all problems. I think that the Middle East is an incredibly messy conflict. I think interventions are messy and ugly, and in fact, are probably not the correct solution a lot of the times. And I think that government distrust in today's day and age compared to 2002 is at an all-time high. So when I was playing this game as a secret agent for the NSA, which I don't think people trust at all nowadays, about an agent that was doing good for America, it kept showing the president's speeches like, we will not tolerate injustices in the world. It just came across as quaint and jingoistic and lacking any nuance. And I'm not an expert on Middle Eastern politics by any stretch. However, even fucking Call of Duty has a more sophisticated and nuanced take on this conflict and the conflict of terrorism than what is shown in Splinter Cell. So it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable with how jingoistic it was about how great America was.
Yeah, I mean, like when the president does appear, he's appearing in like press conferences. So even in a title where they're kind of questioning, every government on every side, I think him appearing that way to the public is perfectly fine. It makes sense, right? That's the face they want to put on.
Yeah, but the problem is that to say that we won't tolerate injustices in the world, to me, is just complete nonsense because right now the president tolerates injustices in the world. And in fact, to some degree, tolerating injustices is a result of realpolitik. Like America, not only does America tolerate injustices that it shouldn't, there are injustices that it cannot do anything about. Like there are countries that are powerful that oppose America that do things, and America cannot do shit about it. I mean, you can come up with some weak ass sanctions, but that's about it. I mean, Russia basically invaded Ukraine. You've got the situation in Hong Kong. Like, it just doesn't ring true. Like it comes across as very phony and fake. But in the world of Splinter Cell, it's simple. You know, America are the good guys, and then there are evil people that oppose them.
Yeah, they could have easily made it a bit more muddy too, but they could have fixed both of our problems with one stone by making Nicolad's feel that his people were being, oppressed by America or whatever, and having it be like a rebellion sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, there are many reasons for Middle Eastern countries to resent America. And that doesn't justify terrorism, but it does present a more, I guess, coherent and holistic view of the conflict. This version of the conflict that Splinter Cell presents to me is it's too jingoistic, it's too pro-America. It's not even trying to look at both sides. And that's where I was a little turned off by its politics. It wasn't so much that I was like filled with disgust playing this game or anything. Like, it's obviously a video game and I'm enjoying doing it, and it's okay to play a good guy. I just think that because we're so embroiled with Middle Eastern politics today, like it's a thing that's still going on today, this is not an accurate representation of the nature of these conflicts. So it was off putting for me.
it's kind of funny, right? Even something like Metal Gear, I feel, does like factional stuff a little better, and that game's like super absurd and silly. But like, oftentimes the factions in that game, it's like unclear, like even within singular units, who's doing the right thing, who's doing whose motivations are what, right? Whereas this, everything was just too clear cut.
Well, I mean, I think Metal Gear Solid perhaps goes too far in the other direction, but I would say that Metal Gear Solid at least has coherent philosophies behind it, and it's a bit hard. You have to dig for them, but it's a very postmodern work. It's subvertive. It's trying to, it's trying, right? Splinter Cell doesn't seem
Yeah.
like it's trying. It just seems to say, yeah, America's good, everyone else is bad, which is a very post 1990 collapse of the USSR way to view the world. And it's just one that does not ring true at all anymore, particularly
No,
with.
it just doesn't.
Yeah, it just doesn't. This isn't how we conceive world politics, even though that was how it was conceived back then. So I don't want to dwell too much more on this, except to say that I think
Basically, don't play this game for the plot, right?
yeah, and like you said, the individual story to story beats are actually really well done. And every time you go into a new mission, you understand what your objective is and everything. It's just that the overall story is just too simple and too jingoistic and too underwritten for me to enjoy it. So the story is nonsense. So yeah, that's how we feel about the story. But we should probably jump into some
Into some
gameplay
gameplay at some
discussion
point.
at some
Yeah.
point. Yeah, yeah. So Splinter Cell is very much a stealth game first and foremost. So there are other elements to its gameplay, like you have a gun that you can shoot. There's a little bit of platforming and climbing, but I'd say that the primary thrust of its gameplay is about sneaking around in shadows, knocking out guards, and moving through the levels. So, in a macro sense, the first thing to talk about, I think, is the broad level design of Splinter Cell, because Splinter Cell, I think, is very different from any stealth game I've ever really played before,
Yeah, it is,
and
right?
that's that it's linear. This is a linear stealth experience. Basically, every single time you go into a room or an area, you need to get to the other side of the room or the area. And then when you get through that area, it's exactly the same thing. It's basically each level is a bunch of rooms or areas stuck together one after the other, and you're just going A to B, A to B, A to B.
Yeah, I found this really surprising. Like, I had never played a Splinter Cell game before, and I didn't really know what to expect coming into the experience. And previously on this show, we played the original Thief Gold and also Hitman 1, Hitman Codename 47. And both of these games feature pretty, like, wide open areas to, explore, and their levels kind of consist of you being dropped in and then having to scout for information and then put all the pieces together and kind of, both solve and progress through the level. Splinter Cell's not like that at all. It was very surprisingly linear. I was actually really surprised when going through it. It felt more similar to something like maybe like Metal Gear Solid 3, where you're just like going forward and then it'll open up into these bigger areas that have a set of patrolling guards or some kind of stealth segment you need to quote unquote solve to get to the next hallway, and you'll kind of daisy chain between these little areas. Something that I kind of wanted to bring up early, that maybe it's a unique thing to me personally, but I was actually kind of apprehensive about going into this game to begin with because for me, I think that something that really characterizes a lot of stealth games in my mind is this like undercurrent feeling of tension and anxiety, which, prior to playing this game, I kind of associated with the moment to moment gameplay, right? Like you're hiding in shadows, you're waiting for patrols to go past. So, like maybe that suspense comes from, waiting for the guard to get past and hoping that they don't see you. But I never actually felt anxious or tense while playing Splinter Cell, and I was really surprised about that. And on reflection, I think it's because in those other games we've played, there's kind of this underlying fear I have that I'm going to miss a critical piece of information and then be stuck wandering these
Hmm.
big open levels for like hours not knowing what to do. But that's impossible in this game because there's no information to find, right? You just progress forward. It's very handholdy in a way, and I kind of preferred that, but I don't think everyone will.
So, just to bring some clarity to how linear these levels are, so I would say like the most open stealth game really is a game like Thief, because you just get dropped into a mansion and you go through the mansion whatever order you like. Basically every single person's experience playing through a level in Thief is going to be pretty different, because you'll explore and uncover the mansion in a different way. Then you've got something like Dishonored, which the levels are nowhere near as sprawling as Thief, but there's still a lot of different ways for you to make your way through the level. Then you've got something like Deus Ex, and now we're getting close. Sorry, Deus Ex Human Revolution, specifically the new Deus Ex games, and you're getting something that's closer to Splinter Cell, because Deus Ex levels often have you progressing from A to B, but they tend to have it in larger rooms with a few crisscrossing paths. So you've got a little bit of, a little bit of verticality. So you've got a little bit of choice in how you move
Yeah,
through a
like you
level.
need to get into the police station and you can either like pick the lock or you can, pick up the boulder or like move the heavy thing with your points in the
Yeah.
strength or hack or go through the sewers. That's not the case here. In Splinter Cell, there's usually only a single door, a single path to go forward. And
Hmm.
the kind of maybe puzzle or the different ways that the player can interact with each area is usually comes down to, whereabouts in the guard's patrol pattern you ambush them from, or if you use your gun or one of your other little gadgets that you get along the way. It's much less. I'm gonna say, there's much less freedom of creativity in this game. There's definitely some, but it's
Hmm.
much less than a lot of the other stealth games I've played previously.
So the way we're framing it, we haven't framed in terms of whether it's good or bad, really. And the thing is, for me at least, like my personal opinion is that this kind of stealth feels, it's not my preferred kind of stealth. Like I think that you're given it's kind of too constricted, too narrow. too many hallways and areas just kind of stuck to one another. However, I will say that these small areas are generally very well designed
Yes.
challenges because it doesn't spam you with like, 15 guards in a small area. It gives you three, and those three all have their own patrol patterns. And it's up to you to find the gap in that patrol pattern because it's perfectly possible to ghost past most of these guards as well, which is often a better plan than trying to knock them out anyway. And I think that even though I do miss the broader, freedom and exploration, particularly of other stealth games, I do appreciate the craftsmanship of these more refined small levels and how they were able to very deliberately craft a challenge around them.
Yeah, I agree. Something that really annoys me about more open games is that it feels like the game designer's hand on the project is a lot lighter. Like there's a lot more, variety of situations that you can possibly get yourself in, but because they're not designed by a person that, whose job it is to make a fun video game, I find that the fun factor on a lot of these, various experiences not to be as fun. Whereas here in Splinter Cell, I think that every single challenge and like puzzle and, patrol route is very deliberately handcrafted, and there is something very, really cool about that, having played a lot of other stealth games where, you get yourself into these not so fun situations a lot of the time.
It's worth pointing out that they're actually quite challenging in a lot of spots. Like I said, the windows that you have to slip through undetected are often very narrow. Like, if you don't knock out guards, there'll be a camera and there'll be guards walking around, and you really have to pick your spot. You have to study the patrol routes and pick your spot, or you can use the gadgets to assist you in a whole bunch of ways. But
Yeah.
if you want to ghost through or you can't see a way to use your gadgets effectively, you cannot fuck this up. This game
Yes.
is very difficult and punishing one if you get things wrong.
Yeah, I basically agree with that. And I really like that, honestly. Earlier on in the episode we did recommend that the PC version's better just on the basis that you get to use quick saves. And I definitely used that a lot, not a heap. I didn't really like cheese any scenarios, but I found myself replaying sections a lot because it was quite tricky to get the exact solution that I was looking for. But I did find it very engaging to, like, you enter a small room and you can see all of the information laid bare in front of you very easily. And then, you quickly come up with a plan and then you spend a little while trying to, get the execution just right? Like,
Mhm.
these things have very specific and very, to me, very engaging solutions. So, like, you mentioned that it was a bit too rigid for your taste, and I kind of on some level, I think this game would have been much improved with a bit more, freedom of creativity, added gadgets, added solutions to a lot of the patrol patterns. But at the same time, like, when I was playing through the game, there was never a point where I felt frustrated by my lack of control and, like, by the lack of variety in the levels, because I think it does a great job of mixing things up throughout the level. Each level
It
feels
does.
distinct, despite the fact that you're really doing the same fundamental stealth gameplay the entire time.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And we'll get into that a bit later. But the game mixes it up with enough slightly different gimmicks that it's enjoyable. Like, there's a mission where there's a spotlight section with landmines, and then you have to sneak across this roof. Then you've got some shootout sections. It really does not feel like you're doing the same thing over and over. There's just enough
Yeah.
nuance and difference between each level to make it feel unique enough that I don't mind it.
I think this game walks a very thin tightrope of creativity and tedium, and I think it actually pulls it off for the most part.
One of the things I wanted to jump into with regards to this level design is to continue our ongoing discussion that we have about quick saving. Because James and I have had this come up a lot where we think that we basically believe that quick saving is problematic because you're encouraged as a gameplay device to do it as much as you possibly can. But the problem with checkpointing is that if checkpoints are too unforgiving or too infrequent, the game becomes incredibly frustrating.
I think that after playing Hitman and then playing this game, I think I've almost done a 180 on my negative feelings on quick saving. Like, it was a fucking breath of fresh air to be able to quick save your game after, playing a game where you had to go from the very beginning every single time you fucked up.
Yeah, and basically I agree. I think the brutal check in Splinter Cell, you maybe get, one checkpoint every 20 minutes of gameplay. Like each mission is usually split into about 3 checkpoints, but it's like if you fuck up, you're going to be losing a lot of progress, and it's very easy to fuck up. But what I think is uniquely why I think quick saving is uniquely suited to the structure of Splinter Cell, because you get to do a quick save at the beginning of each section.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, because Splinter Cell is so cleanly segmented into sections, you feel pretty good just chucking a save at the beginning of an area or room or corridor, and then when you reach the end, you do another quick save. The problem with quick saving in a game like Thief, where there are no clear, I guess, barriers between your exploration, it's kind of just this free form thing, is that you feel bad if you're quick saving every time you blackjack a guard, but without clear barriers to give you an idea of how often you should be quick saving, that's what is incentivized by the gameplay. So I think quick saving and this one save per area works brilliantly in this game.
Yep.
And I think that you should play the game like that. And I think that basically if the game chucked a checkpoint at the start of every area, that would be perfect.
Be the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to get into a quick music break? We've been going for a little while, and then we can give a bit of a chat about the soundtrack as well after that.
Yep, sounds good. Do you want to take us away?
Yeah, sure. So, I found that in general, the music of this game was very atmospheric. It wasn't the kind of soundtrack that had, a lot of, in-your-face melody and that kind of thing. And obviously it shouldn't. It's this, kind of low-key, subtle stealth game. So it went for a really subdued soundtrack, which I thought was great. And it actually borrowed a lot of elements from some horror game soundtracks, which I quite enjoyed. There was often random clinking and rustling of, realistic objects to the point where you never really knew if it was the soundtrack or a guard, stepping on some glass behind you. It made it feel really tense, and I loved that. So, the music track that I've chosen for today is Defense Ministry Nicolad's Office. There was this running motif they had throughout the songs where they had these kind of operatic, angelic vocals just under the, above the tense, brooding atmosphere. And I really liked that and think that this track really played to that strength. So here is the Defense Ministry Office.
And you were just listening to Defense Ministry Interior.
Oh, you got it right that time. This is the
fourth
third
take.
Yeah.
I kept forgetting what it was called. I'm like
Presidential
the Presidential
Palace.
Office Interior Palace. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk about the music is something that has obviously been done in other stealth games, most notably Metal Gear Solid, and that's there's a few different soundtracks for the level of alertness of the enemies. So you've got your normal background music, you've got your alert music where the enemies are aware something is wrong, like they'll have seen your shadow, or they'll be searching for you, but they haven't quite started shooting you. And then the final stage is, of course, where the shit hits the fan and you're being shot at by enemy soldiers and grenades are flying your way, and you're probably going to die within the next 2 seconds. I just want to say that is a really important inclusion to help set the atmosphere, to have like this slower paced atmospheric stuff that kind of gets increasingly crazy as enemies start getting on your trail, and I think it's really well done. None of these soundtracks, I think they do tend to blend together a little bit.
Yep.
Like it's hard for me to say, oh, this soundtrack is, this level. It doesn't really stand out that thematically, but I did appreciate the different music to reflect the different levels of tension that you actually feel while you're playing the game.
Yeah, I actually kind of found it tied into the gameplay a lot too, because I would use the music cues to know when I'd actually, taken out every guard on a particular floor, because it would go from being everyone kind of alerted to that quiet kind of creeping music again.
It would
You know,
slowly fade out. Yeah, I did
yeah.
exactly the same thing. It's like, oh, I can relax now.
Yeah, yeah. And, in general, I think the soundtrack's actually pretty good. Like I said, I really liked the human vocal element. I don't know how to describe it. It was a little,
Yeah, it's more understated. It wasn't like forming the
yeah,
melody. It was almost like one of the it would come in and out of the pieces.
yeah, just part of an instrument, really. In general, I liked it. Like you, I think they faded together a little bit. I can't really distinguish too many tracks from another. The one I picked before, I only picked because it had a lot of those human vocal elements in them. But in general, I liked it, right? It
Yeah,
suited
I
the
liked it.
game.
Yeah, it's and the thing is, as opposed to something like Thief, which also has an atmospheric soundtrack that's like even more minimalistic than this, I didn't mind the more, a slightly less minimalistic one, because you're not crawling around stone floors in a medieval opera house. You're a high-tech secret agent. So the injection of subtle elements of like techno and some very basic synth noises was actually appropriate for this soundtrack. So yeah, quite like the soundtrack. It was on theme.
Yeah, it's no Metal Gear though. Like I'm not going to remember any of these tracks after I
No.
played the game like that I do in that game. But
What a thrill, hey James.
what a thrill. But fine on the whole. So let's get back a bit to gameplay, and I kind of
Hmm.
wanted to go over the more like nitty-gritty aspects of the gameplay, like the controls and what you can actually do as Sam
Yep,
Fisher
sounds good.
throughout Splinter Cell. So how did you feel about the controls, Patrick? For me, it was weird. It kind of seesawed between surprisingly good and like accurate and responsive. Like there was times where for me the controls would do exactly what I wanted and I was like shocked they were so precise. And then there were other times where I was trying to jump up on this fucking ledge and he just would not fucking do it. Um it
Yeah,
was
that
it was a really weird dichotomy. Like there was no middle ground. It was either like perfect or awful.
I completely agree. It's a mixed bag. I think that the thing it does best, which is ultimately the most important thing, is just moving around. Like
Yeah.
as simple a thing as that seems, moving around while crouched and standing, and the three different movement speeds associated with all of them, all control very fluidly and run together beautifully, and you are always exactly where you want to be, which is really important in a game where being 1 centimeter outside in a patch of light can lead to your death.
Something that stood out to me on the PC was that your movement speed was actually bound to the mouse wheel, which I found
Hmm.
kind of odd at first, but honestly it was really practical when I was going through the level and you're trying to, quickly go between running quickly to that mid speed or the really slow creep. I got to admit though, a bit sheepishly, that earlier on I actually forgot that you could change your speed and I spent I don't know, like 20 minutes on the lowest speed, wondering like if it's this slow for the entire game, fuck me.
Oh, that is so painful. So you're
Yeah,
just
but
walking around. Oh my god.
I was just
You
crawling
played
around the place, yeah.
you
And then I
played too
realized
much
I could,
Hitman.
yeah, and then I realized I could basically sprint while crouching, and the whole world opened up to me. But no, I agree with you. The general movement controls do exactly what you want, exactly when you want, and that's really the most important thing. It's when jumping comes into the equation that I found they kind of fell down a bit.
So it's interesting. The thing about movement on a mouse and keyboard instead of a controller is probably one of the situations where playing this game with a controller is going to be strictly superior. Because when you're playing a game like this on mouse and keyboard, if you're playing Thief or Splinter Cell, there are three distinct movement speeds. Whereas with a controller, if you push up on your control stick, you've just got a lot more degrees of control over your movement speed. And I don't know if the original Splinter Cell on Xbox only had 3 degrees of control, but a modern stealth game like Metal Gear Solid 5, that's a game that I play on a controller because it's so nice being able to exactly control how fast you're moving. So it is a downside if you are playing on a mouse and keyboard because you can only click between these movement speeds instead of having a smoother
I
transition.
honestly really liked it. I was wondering, do you reckon it actually makes the game easier because you can be perfectly at that lowest speed all the time without having to hold the analog stick in place? You've got that digital control over it
No,
instead.
I would find using controller far easier, particularly with sneaking up.
Really?
So at the lowest speed, while you're crouching, you cannot catch up to a patrolling guard. At the
Yeah.
medium speed, you can, but they will hear you when you get within a certain radius of them.
Yeah.
So if it's very, very difficult to navigate catching up to a guard to knock them out because you need to slow down to the lowest speed at exactly the right time where you can still catch up to them, and you have to kind of approach them from an angle. If I had better control over my mouse speed, there'd be a speed faster than the slower scrolling speed that you're like to, that the guards wouldn't be able to hear you, and you
Yeah.
could more smoothly transition to that to knock them out easier. So I think it's far easier with a controller.
Yeah, but at the same time, with an analog system, you don't have that clarity of information. You know exactly which speed will alert people to sound with these, kind of incremental changes. Whereas when you've got the full range, I feel like it's harder to understand if you're being quiet or not. Because this game, it has a light meter, so when you're in certain degrees of shadow, you can tell whether or not someone will be able to see you quite easily. But I don't think the same would be true for noise if you didn't have these really exact, margins of error here.
I basically think that it's something that is difficult to learn, but once you've learned it, that's just what I want. And in my time playing through the Metal Gear Solid games, primarily three onwards, so three, four, five, having that exact control over the sneak speed is a very important feature to me,
Yeah.
and one that I would always choose. And Metal Gear Solid 5 in particular is in a lot of ways you can play it as a first person you can play as a third person shooter, and I still play it on a controller. And pretty much the only reason, like literally the only reason I played those games on a controller is to control my sneaking speed. And you know how much I hate shooters on controllers. So
Yeah, you do. You're really fucking
yeah,
against that shit.
so to me that is an important thing. Now that all that being said, I still think this game is perfectly fine to play on a PC with the three control speeds. Like Thief, it's not a deal breaker, but it was a little frustrating at times with how I was sneaking up to guards, and I ended up just ghosting through a lot of levels because I found it was more enjoyable to do that than deal with the sloppiness of that kind of sneaking up to enemies.
Okay, yeah. Well, honestly, for me, I thought that the controlling the movement speed was perfect. I thought it was really good.
Mm.
So it didn't bother me in that way, and I found myself, mostly taking every guard out because I just found it fun to do that. Let's talk about the shooting controls because
Oh,
I think they are
ask.
intentionally poor, but probably I feel like it's aged to the point where it's even worse than it was supposed to be. So as far as I know, the shooting in this game works kind of like it does in Deus Ex 1, where you have to aim at a point and then wait for the reticule to shrink long enough like that you'll get an accurate shot. But even when I waited like I don't know, like 10 seconds to the point where the reticule was no longer shrinking, I found that even if I had it directly on an enemy's head, it would just miss completely sometimes. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, so basically, in the original Deus Ex, you'll eventually get an accurate shot. In this game, the crosshair spread, even when you're crouching completely still and you've been sitting there for 20 seconds, is still inaccurate at medium range. With the pistol, it can be inaccurate at close range. It's
Yes.
atrocious. Also, to clarify how bad it is, if you move your mouse too far while you're aiming, it will reset the bloom and you have to wait.
Yeah.
I have serious problems with not with the intent of this system, but with how it actually plays out.
Yeah, I agree. I have no problem with the idea that shooting is worse than stealth in this game. Like, I think it should be that way. I think the game's mechanics should push the player to be, sneaky and try to take people out with their bare fists rather than, shoot them in the head. I think that guns should be like a last resort if you're struggling or if there's like a very specific scenario that requires a shot.
Or if you're panicking and you can sometimes
Yeah, or you fuck up and you have to resort to guns because you've alerted the entire place.
yeah.
I basically think that the game's a lot better when you're not using the guns at all, which is a real shame because a lot of the gadgets that Sam has access to are actually tied to one of his guns. Thankfully, it's the more accurate of the two guns, but it's still a problem.
So what I think would have been good is that keep the vast majority of these clunky gun mechanics, but let you have an accurate first shot. Like even when you zoom in with the FS2000, there is ridiculous scope sway. It's very frustrating. I think that I would have liked if I could take
I mean,
one
you can hold your breath, right, and make it steady as you
Sure,
want.
sure. But yeah, I just want to aim in and just take a shot accurately without having it, ping behind because the crosshair's too big.
Just make it take longer for the reticule to shrink to that perfect shot, but give you that perfect shot if you get, if I'm sitting there for like a full minute or something, I should be able to hit him in the head. And I was reading on the forums that I think it might be something funny with the PC version as well. So, maybe on the console version this isn't a problem. Because I was watching videos of people play through the game and they were really consistently hitting people in the head, like way easier than I could. And I don't know if that's just they know how finicky these guns are from playing the game a lot, or it's a problem with the PC version and like the weird resolution and stuff with Windows 10. But, just installing it out of the box, I did have a lot of these issues.
The real problem is that there are some compulsory shooting sections in these games in this game, which fucking suck. James, just did you play on normal or hard?
I played on normal. I have learnt my lesson over. I have learnt my lesson over playing genres I'm not super familiar with on the harder difficulty out of the box.
So the thing about hard difficulty is that I chose it because I'm like, I want a harder stealth experience. Has literally no fucking impact on the stealth.
Yeah, none at all. Like, it just changes the amount of health that you and enemies have, and that's like it. Like, I was reading, and this, like, just reading this sentence was so frustrating to me. Apparently, on hard, frag grenades often don't kill in one hit. Like, are you fucking kidding me? What?
Yeah.
Who designs that shit?
Yeah, the reason I picked hard was that I wanted the enemies to be more alert, and honestly, the enemies are very alert in this game. So I'm like, wow, man, I really picked the hard difficulty for a good reason. Cool, this is a difficult stealth game, but apparently it's identical on normal. Yeah, your health packs heal less, you take more damage. Grenades are fucking useless because they don't kill enemies, but bullets do.
Yeah, it makes all the unfun parts of the game more unfun, and it leaves the fun parts of the game the same. So really, highly recommend you guys, if you play this game, to play it on normal. I don't think anything good comes from playing it on hard from what I've read.
There were these two shootout sections, which probably took me. The first one probably took me about 15 times. The second one took me like 30 times, probably. The first one is in the abattoir where you're defending, but you've got the sentry turrets to help you.
Yes,
The
yes.
other time is when you're in the library, like just as you get off the lift. And I'm like, is this game some kind of fucking joke? Because like they're running and flanking you, and you can't get an accurate shot because the moment you strafe around a corner, it takes like 5 seconds for your reticle to settle. And in the meantime, they're shooting you and killing you almost immediately. So yeah, I'd say 30 to 35 times, and I hated every single moment of it. It wasn't
Well, I
satisfying to
mean, that's what the gadgets were for, right? Like, did you use the distraction camera at all? That thing was fucking cool. I loved it.
the distraction camera didn't work during that fight, I don't think, though, did it?
Really? Okay, I found it worked during basically every. No, not that. So there's this camera you can shoot from your gun, and it'll stick to a wall that you shoot it at, and it's got a bunch of other functions other than just being a camera. Like you can make a little bird chirp, which will distract enemies and make them come closer to inspect it. And most importantly, when you press, I think it's either right click or space bar, it lets out knockout gas, so you can, knock out like 3 to 4 enemies in one go with it. So generally, I would save those knockout gas canisters for these sections that would, usually mandate you to bring your gun out. Or a lot of the time, honestly, I used quick save to kind of cheese through some of the shootouts because they just like suck. They're just not fun because of the shooting mechanics. I think there's like 1 or 2 like mandatory shootout sections in the whole game. They have no place in this game. I think they're a complete design mistake.
Yep.
I think that just stick to what you're good at. They shouldn't have had these, but there's only 2 in the whole game, so it's not a huge deal, right?
Yeah, they're not enjoyable. They're too difficult. You have literally no sense of satisfaction. So because of the RNG of the gun accuracy, it just feels like you're rolling the dice until your gun decides to be accurate. That's how these sections feel. You just keep
Yeah.
doing the same thing until your gun's accurate, and then you're like, thank fuck that's over.
So to put into perspective, because while we're ragging on the shooting mechanics a lot, overall it really didn't phase me that much in the grand scheme of things because it comes into play so little. Like I barely used the guns to get through the game. So overall I'd say they suck, but at the end of the day, this is a stealth game. I didn't have to use them, except these 2 poets.
The primary use of your guns is shooting out lights for what it's worth.
Yeah.
You will spend more bullets shooting out various lights and candles, not candles, various lights and like chandeliers than you will shooting, bullets into enemies. At least that was how it was for how I played it. I think this game, it's funny, if it's draws from a lot of different stealth games, but for all of its linear structure, I think it draws from Thief the most.
The most? Yeah, I
Because
agree.
while I was playing this game, I kept thinking, wait a second, that's just a thing in Thief, just with a high-tech skin. Like the distraction cameras that you were talking about, I'm like, there are distraction arrows in Thief. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you put out torches in Thief with water arrows, and this you shoot out lights. And even something like the optic cable that you can use to peek under doorways, I'm pretty sure in Thief 2 you can peek through the
Keyholes.
keyholes, and I'm like, it's just the same thing. Like it's wrapped in a different skin, but it uses a lot of these mechanics and it wraps them up in a linear rather than an open setting. But yeah, I kind of thought that was quite funny how much it took from it.
Yeah, and like the different types of floors that make different sounds and the,
Yeah,
the
that's it.
varying
Yeah,
degree of the shadows. Yeah. And
yeah.
to be honest, those are all great mechanics, and that like it's a good decision to steal those. Honestly, like, and I think they implemented them well into this game. They didn't take these mechanics and do a poor job of them. They integrated them really well into Splinter Cell, so I think they did a good job.
Hmm.
So just to stick back on the controls, I just want to talk about some of the like. I feel like for a 2003 game, Sam Fisher can do a lot of stuff control wise that made me surprised. Like, so there are these long power lines or like ropes that go across streets or that kind of thing, and you can grab them with your hands and you can swing across them, but you can also like press C to get your legs up on them and kind of like compact your body on the rope and all that kind of stuff that I wasn't really expecting from a game this old. You have a lot of options and there's like a lot of attention to detail stuff, not just with like shooting out the lights, but like something in particular that just like blew my mind when it first got introduced to the game was so there's these thermal goggles that you get really early on, right? And they're not super useful, like compared to the night vision goggles, but later on in the game, there's this section where you have to get through a bunch of these doors locked by keypads, but you don't have the keypad codes for this level. Whereas, like in previous levels, you would just knock out a guard and steal his USB stick. It was really stupid, and the game even like made a joke about how easy it was to get these door codes. But anyway, you don't have the door codes this time, and the way you get through these doors is that you wait for a guard to put in their number, and then you put on the thermal goggles, and you can see the heat signatures from their fingerprints, which are slowly dissipating. The most recent heat signature, the biggest one, is the last key he pressed, and it gets smaller in the order that he pressed them. It was really cool, and there's like lots of little stuff like this throughout the game that I thought was, really fun, really immersive, and just why don't more games have this kind of weird stuff in them?
So I was far less impressed by this than you seem to be. These are just all scripted actions. And it's the same with the climbing. Like there is basically zero freeform climbing in this game. It's we want you to climb this specific sequence of things in this specific way. So you
Did
climb
you?
up this ladder, then you go on this rope and walk along it, and then you do this. And it's just all specific scripted climbing sequences. And while I think that they're well animated, I guess, they are still very slow and clunky and deliberate. It doesn't feel like you're climbing or exploring or making your way through the level. It's
There
just
were
the
a bunch of
developers.
like hidden like platforming challenges. I don't know how many of those you found, where there were some more open kind of platforming areas that you need to jump on bars and do all sorts of weird stuff to get up to the top to get like, I don't know, like a health pack or some grenades or some cool gadget ammo.
I don't know. Yeah, but did you really enjoy doing those? I know what you're
Yeah, I
talking
actually
about. There,
did.
well, there are one or two things, but it's not an enjoyable platform experience because Sam Fisher is it's a clunky, very clunky experience. The way the mantling works is awkward. Falling off a ledge and grabbing it is awkward. The worst thing is when you try to like a transfer from like a ladder or a pipe to a ledge that's near you, you kind of have to fall awkwardly and I think be aiming the mouse at the right angle and holding W and then you'll grab on. But there were many times where I tried to do that, I'd fall to my death. So I was quick saving at the top of every pipe. What I will say is that the platforming is kind of like it's decently well animated, but it is very slow. You're very slowly transitioning and climbing from object to object. You don't feel powerful or good when you're climbing.
Maybe it's like the inner WoW player in me. That game's full of really janky, shitty platforming that I kind of like that kind of thing. I don't know why. I agree with you that, probably it's objectively shitty, but there's just something so satisfying of doing these platforming challenges that you're not sure if they're even supposed to be a platforming challenge. You're just trying to, abuse the jumping mechanics, and I kind of found that really, really engaging.
Like, don't get me wrong, I actually love janky, shitty platforming. Like Superland, which is a game that came out last year. I love that game to pieces. And a large, I guess, pinnacle of that game is its janky platforming and trying to abuse it in various ways. But the freedom of movement you have in that game is insane. Like you're just sailing around, it's in first person, you've got double jumps and triple jumps, and I would even argue in MMOs you've got perfect control of your characters, you're sliding up mountains and all that. This is not like that. It's a lot more clunky and deliberate, and that's not fun for me to play with or abuse as you have.
Okay, sure.
So did you enjoy that final platforming sections on the last level as you slowly had to work your way around the edge of the presidential palace.
Yeah, that was fine. My
I
favorite
hated it.
part of my favorite janky platforming bit was in the car park area where there's those I beams. You have to like jump all the way to the top. I don't know if you remember that.
Not specifically, no.
No, there's basically all of these like just these rails, and there's like they just go upwards vertically up this tower, and if you badly jankily jump up all of them, you get a bunch of health packs and stuff like that. It was really funny for me to find because I don't think it's supposed to be obvious that it's there.
I don't think I found that one.
Alright, sure, you're not as big as a fan of the platforming as I was, and probably most people won't be either, to be fair. So I just want to go back to that keypad thing I was talking about. So we mentioned earlier that with the linear level progression, it does a good job of keeping things fresh, and I think it does that, mostly well by introducing little elements slowly throughout the game. Like as I said, like later in the game, you get the access. You realize you need the thermal goggles to get through the keypads, and then kind of through the middle of the game, they introduce these mines that you need to sneak past really slowly in order to not activate, and then you can pick them up and set traps for enemies if you want.
Or you can run past them and have them explode behind you, I found.
Explode behind you, yeah.
You just sprint through at full speed. It's such a great strategy.
It's such a great strategy, yeah. So the game does introduce stuff like that bit by bit, and I think that it should have maybe introduced a few more, but I was overall happy with the fact that each level felt pretty distinct from one another.
I think that the number of gimmicks in each level, and some levels had multiple gimmicks, is actually completely fine. I think that's perfect. Like in that abattoir section, you've got that bit where you're going through the fridges and you use the thermal goggles for vision. You've got the semi-trailing mission that you do on the oil rig. You've got tweaks like the CIA mission where you're not allowed to kill anyone at all. So you have to be super careful with how you approach it. I think that this issue of slight repetitiveness is just a fundamental kind of like a part of this limited level design that they've got on display here. If you're only ever going from A to B, it doesn't matter how many gimmicks you put in to break up the gameplay, you're still just sneaking past guards in the shadows. And with no exploration, there's only so much you can do. I don't think the game ever gets boring. Like at no point was I like, I don't want to play this game anymore. I've done too much sneaking. It's just that the gameplay stops evolving past a certain point. You're still just sneaking through the shadows in the final mission, and it does get more difficult, but you're still finding that window in the patrol route. Whereas I would say, particularly like the later levels in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, the second one, has some very challenging and interesting sequencing things you can do in terms of sneaking through. And similarly, I think that Thief really pushes it with the different surfaces and number of guards on specific missions that really elevate it and complicate the gameplay. Splinter Cell never really reached that point for me. It was still the same simple, refined, crafted sneaker from start to finish, pretty much.
Yeah, I think simple but refined is the way I'd probably describe most of this game. Like, the game is very simple and it doesn't change it up. It changes itself up enough to be engaging, but really it gets on by having just really well-defined stealth mechanics that,
yes,
honestly, I just think are really good. Like, I usually don't go for these kinds of stealth games, but I found myself engaged start to finish with this game because the fundamental stealth mechanics of this game are really strong, and they're strong throughout the entire experience.
Yeah, it just another point of comparison. One of the games we compared it to was Metal Gear Solid 3, how you're kind of going through these discrete areas. I think even Metal Gear Solid 3 has greater variety in how you approach these challenges, largely because of stuff like going prone and the grass patches and the uniform system and everything. It gives you a lot of options to to either sit patiently or distract guards or
Yeah, and
whatever.
like also just the insane attention to detail in that game, right? You
Yeah.
can play through Metal Gear Solid 3 like 100 times and not have seen every stupid little gimmick that the developers put in the game. There's like hundreds of weird little things, and like I'm surprised that even to this day, when I'm reading about that game, I find, something new I didn't know about it. That's not the case here.
This is all to say that I just want to make it crystal clear the nature of this game so you don't go into it with the wrong kind of impression. Its fundamental mechanics are really strong and solid and enjoyable, but it's not going to blow your mind in this regard. And it's not giving you heaps of choice. It's just about it does one thing very well for the most part, and it's enjoyable to do that one thing.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Splinter Cell's core game mechanics are really good, and it really carries the experience from start to finish, along with some really brilliant level design. So, I think it's about time that we go to another music break, Patrick. So, it is your turn to provide us with some lovely serenade before we, wrap up a bit about the gameplay.
So the soundtrack I went for is CIA Lobby, which aesthetically as well, spoilers, is my favorite level. This one, it uses a lot of these. I don't know what the instrument is or even what it's trying to be, but it's like this echoey sort of like deep noise. It reminds me of those where you get the thong or the flip flop, as our American audience would be, and you hit the organs and it makes that echoey sort of noise. I don't know if you have any idea what I'm talking about.
I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
Sure, they used to have it at the science fair. It's like a muffled, echoey noise which kind of forms the basing of the track. It's kind of ominous. It's kind of tense, and I just like this soundtrack. It stood out to me. So this is CIA Lobby.
That was CIA Lobby, and despite Patrick's poor description, I understand what he means now. So, we just spoke a lot about the gameplay and kind of, agreed that for the most part the core gameplay is pretty good. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we moved on to aesthetics?
Yes. So I didn't really talk about this in story because I was banging on about it for ages, but just a couple of little details about the small amount of environmental storytelling that's in this game. So you'll find these data sticks on soldiers, and when you hack computers, it'll give
Oh
you
my
little
god.
snippets of story.
It's absurd, right? Like, every single goon and their mother has a security like keypad hidden in an email that they've saved to a USB stick. It's like it's absurd, right?
Well, I mean, I don't really have a problem with this. Like, environmental storytelling is a thing that you need to get across somehow. I mean, they could have written journals or diaries, I guess, but in a game of this technology era, emails and like things on a PDA is probably the best way to get it across. How would you prefer they do it?
I mean, the game even makes jokes about how silly it is later on, by like some of them are like this guy, like one of the villains is just ranting about how stupid people are for putting these like non-encrypted emails on
Yeah.
USB sticks rather than leaving it on their computers, and it's silly. It's really
It,
silly.
it is funny how every key code you get tells them to immediately delete this email upon
And they
receipt, and
didn't, yeah.
literally no one has done it. But I don't know, James. For me, this is just a completely acceptable gameplay device. It's one that I actually love to pieces because this is. I think that it's a very light touch here, unlike, even something like System Shock that we did earlier for the show.
Ugh.
But it's one I appreciated. I like having the guards get emails amongst one
No,
another.
no, no, no. Don't get me wrong. I think it's perfectly fine, but it is like a little silly when you
Yeah,
step back and you read it. The actual
yeah.
email conversations are fine. I think they did these were probably the best bits of story delivering in the game, as opposed to like the cutscenes and the
Yes.
the microphone, the radio conversations, which were a bit dry. I wish the characters had as much personality in those conversations as they did in the emails, because then it would have done a lot more for me.
The other bit which I quite enjoyed was the Max Payne esque sort of like skits that you encountered that the enemies were doing as you went around the world. Like the best one was when it's in one of the early missions. Someone has come to the police station to file a complaint, and he goes up to the desk. He says, "Yeah, I want to file a complaint." And the police officer says, "No, you've gone to the wrong
Yeah.
desk. It's over there next to him." So the guy goes to the next desk, and then the police officer walks around to the other desk. And then, you've got stuff like the Chinese are talking about the Americans, and they think that they can defeat the Americans easily, but that they'll never overcome McDonald's. And
Yeah.
McDonald's is an unbeatable juggernaut. And once again, these are silly, but I quite enjoyed them, like I enjoy them in Max Payne. They're just these funny little conversations and moments that you stumble upon that are good jokes, basically. So that it's not a big part of the experience, but I think they added to it.
Yeah, I agree. I actually did quite like that a lot. But it kind of got lost in the the overall mediocrity of the rest of the story for me, though.
I agree, yeah, but it was a bit of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess last little bit to touch on for me was talking about the lockpicking mini game, which I generally find in most games to be fucking terrible.
System Shock flashbacks.
Oh my fucking god, that game can. Ugh. But anyway, the lockpicking in this game is very inoffensive. You walk up to the door, and you press WASD until you notice that the animation goes, and then you mash that button until it stops moving, and then you figure out which the next button to mash is. Yeah, you basically mash WASD in a certain order that you have to guess until the door opens. It's more of a time waster to add tension. Like when you're actually picking these locks and there's guards patrolling behind you, it gets really tense. You're like, holy shit, which one is it? And trying to mash the rest button. I basically think it's the perfect lock mini game. It doesn't require any like skill or knowledge. It's just a bit of tension.
But basically, I would like this is about as simple as it get. But if it could literally be a progress bar that fills up on your screen, that would be even better than me. Like you press the lockpick button, and then it takes four seconds for this lock complexity to unlock. You don't need lockpicking mini games. Get rid of them. Developers, pay heed. No more hacking mini games. No more lockpicking
No,
mini
no, no.
games.
Hacking mini games are okay.
No,
Lockpicking mini games different.
they add nothing to the experience. They should all be gotten rid of. This time wasting thing that means that you can't do it while there are guards patrolling near you is perfect. That is the function they should fulfill. The simpler, the better.
You're telling me you don't want some crazy mini game that takes you hours to master, and even then you don't understand what's going on?
Deus Ex's hacking minigame was like the biggest waste of time. I hated it so much. Everyone's gushing about it. It's like, no, just get rid of it. The original Deus Ex had it right, where it literally is a progress bar.
I liked Bioshock's pipe puzzles, which I don't really know.
You fucking degenerate.
I don't know many people that agree with me, but I thought it was fine. Fuck them getting rid of
Yeah, the
that for
first time's
Bioshock
fine.
too. Yeah.
Then you want to play Bioshock, but instead you're playing a fucking pipe puzzle.
No. Sometimes I boot up Bioshock to play the pipe puzzles. Yeah.
Anyway, minigames suck. The emphasis on a simple one is better here.
Yeah, so let's move on to aesthetics. Patrick, how do you think this game held up?
So it's actually funny. One of the returning ideas in this show is that more cartoony, stylized, cell shaded 2D art looks better and, in fact, looks good. Whereas a lot of the more modern, transition to 3D art, things like Max Payne and even the first Call of Duty have awful character models and are ugly as sin. I think this is the first game of this era, like modern realistic 3D graphics, where it looks acceptable.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a masterpiece with a couple of levels which I thought looked very good, but it wasn't offensive. And I think that the animations were nice and smooth, and I think the models for the most part were fine, except the faces were still a bit whatever. But there was enough detail on the models and textures that it didn't stand out too badly. I think this game looked pretty good. I was pretty impressed.
And honestly, when you're like crawling around in the shadows, it's really hard to notice any imperfections in the texture work and, aliasing issues because you just can't fucking see it, right? I think, the
Yeah,
nature of this as a stealth game actually kind of hides a lot of the imperfections. But overall, I agree with you. I was actually surprised at how well this has held up. It's not brilliant or anything, lots of the levels seem a bit more sparse than they would in a modern title. Like sometimes, you thought a room looked a bit barren, like it needed a bit more clutter, but everything looks clean. It doesn't get in the way. And, I actually think that when you're sneaking around in the shadows, Sam's goggles look really cool in the darkness, even though it makes no sense that enemies can't see them too.
Yeah, I think that the emphasis on lighting is a huge part of this. Because Splinter Cell is a game about shadows and light, the dynamic lighting is beautiful, and I think it can really do a lot to bring a world to life. Like the problem with Thief is that the lighting still produced these kind of jagged edged shadows
Yeah.
because that was the technology they were looking for. The Splinter Cell looks far better. The softer shadows and how all the different types of light sources like bounced off one another it does look good. Like when you've got a big chandelier, you've got ceiling lights, and then you've got little lights above the doorways, and all those light sources are competing against one another. It produces a pretty cozy image. And I want to take this moment to highlight what I think was the best looking part of the game. And that was at the beginning of the CIA level when you're out in the rain outside the CIA building. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but I actually thought that my favorite looking part of the game was probably in the second part of that CIA mission when you're up on that second floor and you can see the rain on the outside of the windows. But in general, I agree. I think that level and as well the abattoir had a really good atmosphere going on for them.
Yeah, I don't know how to just. It was raining quite heavily. It hasn't rained for quite a while where I'm at while I was playing that level, and it felt really cozy, which
Yeah.
which is silly to say, but playing that level in the rain as he's sneaking through in the light sources and everything, it felt comfortable, and I think that's just all the aesthetics, which is very impressive from a game that uses this sort of style of realistic graphics. Yeah,
Yeah.
so overall, I'm pretty high on these graphics. I don't think they're incredible, but they do a pretty good job, and that is a remarkable thing for a game aspiring for realism in 2002.
Yeah, I think this is the probably the first game that we've reviewed that is going for a realistic look that actually still manages to pull it off to a decent degree. Like
Yeah,
obviously it's not going to blow your mind. This is a game from 2003, but it does look good for its age. I got to give it that.
I mean, it's crazy to think this game is pretty much contemporary with Hitman and Max Payne, and it looks
Ugh.
that's what's so crazy about it. How
Yeah.
significant the difference is. It's nuts. I think at the time of release, this must have been one of the prettiest games, but yeah, still looks good. So I'm glad we're agreed on that. I was getting ready. I was ready for you to hit back against these graphics.
No, no, no. The worst part of the graphics are definitely the character models, and as you
Yeah,
said, the textures on the faces. When you have to use a gun and you're zoomed in on an enemy, it does show its age a lot. But all the texture work and the detailing of the
the
environment.
cutscenes are quite bad. Like the president at his press conference and the news reporter, they just look awful.
Well, I mean, I wasn't actually looking at the cutscenes because I was trying to avoid getting, a seizure from all
Fair
the
enough.
flashing they were doing. But yeah, no, I agree with you. When I did rewatch the cutscenes on YouTube, they didn't look that red hot. But there's almost this level of stylization. When you're in the pitch black, I'm really glad that this game was allowed to have really deep shadows.
Yeah.
I think the thing that stands out to me is when Dark Souls 2 came out, and it was supposed to have all these like light mechanics and real dark areas that you had to light up with a torch. And obviously, it felt like the publisher pulled the plug and was like, people aren't going to like that, it's too dark. But this game goes full on the darkness, and I really appreciate that. I think it makes everything look very striking in certain conditions.
Dark Souls 2 is just a constant string of disappointment that never ends in so many ways.
Yeah, kind of
I
like this
guess
show.
I know this has nothing to do with the show, but you brought this up, so I get a chance to say this. Dark Souls 2 apologists disgust me. Dark Souls 2 has one good thing about it, and that's that it has a balanced multiplayer scene where different play styles are balanced. Everything else is a fucking regression from Dark Souls and even fucking Demon Souls. I'm mad at that game. Stop apologizing for that garbage. It's terrible. All right. Oh, the DLC is pretty good as well. All right. End of rant. We can return to Splinter Cell.
Yeah. Splinter Cell looks pretty good for its age. We'll give it that. Actually, there was one thing I did want to point out. When your character talks to other characters, like in a lot of other modern games, that would usually like trigger a cutscene, whereas here they just like stand very stiffly staring at each other talking. It was very odd, especially when these conversations go for like a couple minutes and there's still enemies patrolling in the background. Like this one time I was talking to a dude and this patrol came out of nowhere, and I was locked in place and I just got shot, and then the game overed while I was trapped in a conversation. It was really, really bad.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me as well at one point. But I think in mine they didn't shoot me until the conversation was over.
Oh, how
So
polite of them. That's
I
so
must
kind.
have caught them in a weird script thing. I was like, uh-oh, better finish this conversation, and then instant death.
Yeah, so that's definitely that's a bad, but barely. It happened to me like once in the entire game, whatever. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say about Splinter Cell. Did you want to move on to your final thoughts?
Yes, let's move on to final thoughts. I mean, I've said a lot of them already, but allow me to sum up here. Splinter Cell is a very good game. I do recommend it. Understand the nature of this as a stealth game. I've played most stealth games now. It's pretty good in that it's a very linear, simple, well crafted experience. There's not exploration, there's not an enormous amount of room for innovation. But if you enjoy the fundamentals of stealth games, this is probably the closest to Thief that you can get in terms of the basic stealth mechanics. In terms of exploration, it's got none of it. So it depends what you love about Thief. But I certainly did enjoy sneaking through shadows, and particularly ghosting through enemies patrols was very enjoyable. It's pretty tough, so also be ready to quick save regularly at the beginning of each area. I don't think it's right to try and play through this game on your first playthrough just relying on checkpoints. It's just a little too frustrating and punishing. So play the PC version, make use of the quick saving. Yeah, very good game. Do recommend. This game exceeded my expectations. It's now a franchise I want to play more of. I'm keen to play Pandora tomorrow and Chaos Theory and pretty much every game in the franchise because of how strong this was. So, yeah, highly recommend Splinter Cell.
I agree wholeheartedly. This game blew my expectations out of the water. When we played Thief, I enjoyed that game, but I enjoyed this game a lot more. And I think, like I said before, a lot of that has to do with my preference in the level design. This is a very, very, very linear game. And that put the focus on the moment to moment to gameplay. Like there wasn't a lot of bullshit messing around with going to find little clues all over the level. There was just pure stealth gameplay goodness, and I loved that. Honestly, from a purely mechanical point of view, this is probably my favorite stealth game going forward, and I'm really excited to see where the series goes from here. I was impressed at how tight everything outside of the shooting was, and how well the levels just managed to mix things up constantly. Not too much that it becomes distracting, but just enough that it walks this very fine tightrope. I don't think I could play this game again very soon. I don't think playing through it a second time would give me anything that, I didn't get the first time around. But what I did get to play was a great experience with really solid stealth mechanics, great level design, and I highly recommend this game. And the only reason I see not to give it a recommendation is the fact that the PC version is questionable at times, and that if you're not a fan of the linear rigidity of the structure, then maybe give it a pass. But otherwise, glowing recommendation from me.
Yeah, so I would put Thief above this. I'd probably even put Metal Gear Solid 3 above this. But I think that this game is probably about equal to Dishonored. And I think I enjoyed it more than I did the new Deus Ex game. So yeah, I rate it very highly. This is a very fun game to play.
Patrick actually managed to pick a good one this time.
Yeah,
This
certainly
was
better than
much,
Hitman.
much better than Hitman, yes.
All right, so that about wraps it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and listening to us ranting and discussing and arguing about Splinter Cell. We are the Retro Spectives podcast. You can find all of our content at rspodcast.net. We've got all of our episodes and a bunch of articles about the games we've played, both back in time and of the present day. We're available everywhere you listen to podcasts, but you can find everything centralized there. So I recommend going there to find our stuff. Most importantly, we have a Discord server. We don't have a Patreon or any of that garbage, but we do have a Discord server because if there's one thing we love doing more than anything else, it is arguing about video games. So if you have any opinion on any video game, whether it's one we've covered in the episode or even just a modern one or an old one that we haven't played yet, we would love to hear it, particularly if I get to take the opposing side and tell you why your opinion is wrong.
Yeah, and we also get a lot of recommendations on our Discord. Many of the games we've played on this show come direct recommendations from our Discord users. So if you've got a game that you want us to play, come on down and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, it's text only, so no mics, none of that. Just good old text chat discussion. So even if you want to come down and just lurk the forum a bit, that's great too.
So that's the episode. So now it's time for us to discuss what we're doing for the next fortnight. So James, now that we've done yet another stealth game, what game are we doing for the next fortnight? What have you chosen?
Why are you asking me, Patrick? You're the one who started playing it already.
I know, but it's a convention of the show that I asked. Allow me to announce it then. James has chosen Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, which seems to be a cross between, I don't know, Skyrim and the Source engine. I'm still in the very early stages, so I'm a little vague on the details, but it's basically a physics engine simulator plus Skyrim combat plus
medieval
some other
combat,
shit.
yeah, and some magic. Yeah, I've had this game recommended to me non-stop by a number of people, and I've always, I don't know, found something I was more interested in at the time, but now seems about the time to do it. I've read a lot of reviews and heard many good things about all the secrets that you can find in this game and all the janky physics action that you can get up to, so I'm very excited to see it. We were quite high on Heroes of Might and Magic 3, so kind of interested.
Game.
Yeah, basically the same game. So I'm very interested to see what this. It does look like a grand strategy to me. Have you seen some of that combat?
The most important thing is that there's a stealth skill tree, so I know what I'll be doing.
Yeah, I hear it's quite bad, so I look forward to you hating the game in 2 weeks. Yeah, so we'll be back in 2 weeks with Dark Messiah. Hope you look forward to it. And until then, thanks for listening.